On this podcast, we typically talk about investing in raw land. Today, we're going to take a slight detour and talk to a successful land investor about investing in a completely different real estate asset. In our business, we send a lot of mail and have high expectations about the post office. But have you ever thought about investing in post offices? It sounds crazy. But on today's episode of the Land.MBA podcast, veteran land and commercial real estate investor Jeff Jones is going to go deep on investing in post offices.
All right. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Welcome to the Land.MBA podcast. Today we have with us special guest Jeff Jones, and of course, my troublemaker partner here, Howard Zonder, the one and only. How's it going today, gents?
Doing great, thank you. Appreciate you guys having me.
It's
Awesome,
our
awesome.
pleasure. I'm excited to have you here. I mean, Jeff, you and I, we go back what, a year, maybe a little bit, a year and a half, maybe.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and just been tracking your journey in land, and it's been another exciting one. But you have so much more to talk about than just that. You just a wealth of information on quite a variety of topics. So I think I'm kind of excited about what we're doing today. And one thing that I've noticed recently is it just takes longer to get the mail than it used to be. I don't know if you guys are noticing that, but mail has just gotten slow. I can't quite figure it out. Maybe it's the whole COVID thing. Maybe they have to like socially distance inside the distribution centers or whatever it is. But it's becoming a bit disappointing. But you are, from what I understand, an expert in the area of post offices. So maybe you'll be able to help us shed some light on all of that at some point in the conversation.
Absolutely.
Well, that's awesome. So maybe we could just start, Jeff. Just give us a little bit of your background, because I know you started in something else, and then you've got real estate background, and just sort of tell us how you found the land business and why, given what other things you were already doing, and how it's been for you so far. Yeah,
Absolutely. So I've been in the commercial real estate sphere for almost 25 years, and I've basically my career is centered around commercial brokerage and primarily tenant representation. So think of it as an outsourced real estate department for companies. I help companies buy buildings, lease buildings, dispose of property, renew leases, really everything that a company that is managing real estate has to do. That's what I help them with. And I also, with my business partners, we own some assets as well, which I know we'll get into. I've got a couple different asset types. I've got a investment in medical office, a little bit in industrial, and then some single tenant leased assets, which are post offices. And I got into the land business by accident. I was 2 years ago playing in the championship game of our beer league here in Minneapolis for ice hockey, and I got smoked into the boards, broke a rib. Stayed on the bench, went to the bar. We closed the bar down. I texted my wife when I got home and said, "Honey, I'm in the basement. I'm going to stay on the couch. I have a broken rib, at least one, and I'll see you in the morning." And I saw her about 5 minutes later, but she was kind of in a tizzy. But at the end of the day, what happened was I had nothing to do for like 2 months because I couldn't sleep. So I was sitting in this recliner after putting the kids to bed and just kind of listening to podcasts. And I discovered the land business that way. And at first I thought, well, I understand real estate and the returns that you can generate from land. That's not realistic. And so what's the catch? And I kind of let it saturate in my mind for a week. And And then I went back and I saw that, there was, I did a web search for the podcast I listened to, and I saw that there were a couple on the same podcast who were talking about land. So I listened to them. And then I tried to poke a hole in the business, and I really worked at it. And finally I realized that I couldn't find a hole in the paradigm of flipping land. So I thought, well, okay, I'm gonna take the plunge. I might be the object of a little bit of ridicule in the office when I go in and tell them, hey, I'm gonna start buying scrub land in the middle of the Southwest. But that's exactly what I did. And I did get ridiculed. But the ridiculing kind of stopped when I said, hey, look at this spreadsheet. I got my mortgage covered for the next 5 years. So that was kind of an aha moment, I think, for especially the younger guys in our office who are just struggling to make, mortgage payments to begin with, let alone what goes on top of it in a straight commission business. So that's how I got into the business. And I'd say I am basically 2 years in now. And I've been progressively, increasing a pretty good monthly cash flow. And I've had a lot of cash deals this year, which have been really exciting. And I've already crossed the threshold of 6 figures in gross sales for the year, and that took me. I guess it took me half the time it took me in 2021 that it did in 2020. So things are progressing, and still buying as much land as I possibly can, while at the same time doing as many brokerage deals as I can as well, because that too is a great business, and I need to be around people, and I need to be in the office and kind of hustling to be satisfied. So it's been a great ride so far in land.
Nice. Yeah.
Awesome. Sounds great.
On Tuesday night on the Landspeed mastermind call, I'd love to use like, yeah, I had this property up for, I don't remember the numbers. It was like for 4,500 and it wasn't moving. So I increased the price to 6,800 and it sold in a week.
Yep. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Opposite paradigm.
Yeah, it was just, had gorgeous views of the mountains, and I could not figure out why it hadn't sold. I had sold another 10 acres, 10 different properties in that area. And that one just did not sell. And I thought it was the best property that I had. So I priced it like that all of a sudden.
It's interesting. I've done that in the past too, on a couple of occasions. And I think that sometimes it's there's a paradigm by buyers that think that, I'm looking for this type of property in this area. And from what I've seen, it's going to kind of be in this price range. And so I think if they see something that's dirt, like appears too cheap, they glaze over it like, must not be real. Maybe it's a scam, whatever.
With it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or they're setting their price filters because they have an idea, of what prices should be. And that's interesting. Yeah. I have experienced that a time or two as well. And along that line, something, I recently took a page out of another Landspeeder's book, actually. There are some areas where, a lot of the gurus teach, when you get your property, you want to be able to come in and undercut everybody. And to me, that's just a race to the bottom, right? And he's taken some of these, not super cheap desert squares, but decently nice properties, but still lower end properties. And he's asking 20-25% more, but really investing in his marketing. Like some properties that maybe you wouldn't invest in drone video, he's doing drone video and having them nice professionally edited and doing a really just positioning it very professionally. And he's moving them just as fast, but just doing it for more money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think photography makes a huge difference in this business. You see people that advertise Google Earth images as their pictures of the property. And it's kind of like, spend $200, get someone out there, get them to walk it, get them to take notes, get them to write a narrative so that you can have that already done and hand it to a VA to just kind of clean up some of the rougher ends. And put the property out there as something that's eye catching.
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
love that
Now,
you said
I'll
that.
make a caveat.
It's just
Go ahead,
I love that you say that, because we were having a conversation, I don't know, last week or 2 weeks ago, about who are the guys that are really knocking it out of the park in land. And it's typically it's people who were already entrepreneurs or already kind of steeped in the business and understand how to use, or people and organization and process in order to make it happen without trying to figure out how to do every last thing themselves. And and given that you've already got an office and you've already got, so you're already in that environment, just figuring out how to, I'm going to get this resource, and then I'm going to get this stuff, and I'm going to pass it over to this resource, and then they're going to post it up. That's how you do it. It's great.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
not difficult.
exactly. Yeah, it's just a process, and making sure that you have that process and have the people, but just to make a caveat on the photos, like sometimes there's just a logistical issue where you've got the property, and you've got delays in getting a photographer out there. Or sometimes what we'll do is, if we know we've got more properties, we won't send them out onesie twosies. We'll wait till we get a handful and then send them out to do the whole thing, economies of scale. But if we've gone ahead and purchased 3 or 4, we'll go ahead and start marketing with as good a screenshots as we can have until we get the photos. And occasionally, I've sold properties. I get them sold just as I've paid the photographer, and then I don't need the
Always.
photos, right? That's happened a few times, but you got to do it. You got to have good. Sometimes you get lucky, but we don't want to depend our businesses on being lucky, right? We want to just do it right.
Yeah, exactly. I've had them with. I mean, I had a car on wheels and a bunch of other stuff just on a parcel. And what happens? I find a guy from Idaho. He says, "Well, my whole business is hauling away used cars. I'll buy the property and I'll take the car with you." So I confirmed with the sheriff's office it wasn't stolen, and I took what I thought was going to be $1,000 problem and turned it into a over full price sale that I didn't think I was going to get.
Yep.
I actually
did that
have
on
to
a
pull
property that had a bunch of burned out stuff on it.
I need to pull a page from David, because I have a property, and every time somebody goes to look at it, the neighbor comes out with a shotgun and says, "Get off my land." And so I'm going to pull a page from David and sell it to a motorcycle gang.
Should I tell that story?
Yeah, absolutely. It's great.
Oh God, this was awesome. So let's see if I can remember. So when I was pretty early in the game, this was a few years ago, I sold a property on terms to a guy, and it was in freaking Blanca, Costilla County. It was 20 acres. I think I paid like $1,500 all in with back taxes and everything for it. I sold it to this guy for like 12 grand on terms. He gave me like 1,000 down, and he paid on it for, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years. And so I was, well whole. I probably had, collected $4,000 on the deal, $3,500 on the deal. Turns out this guy was completely crazy. So what he had done, and this is the flat, nothing on it desert square, right? And he had somehow trenched a big trench to push a motorhome into. So I think he got a motorhome that didn't run, towed out there, and got it pushed into this thing. So basically it was wheel level, which I guess and then he filled it in to kind of winterize it, because he wanted to live out there full time. And he started adding on plywood and just building onto this thing. And he did this video. I mean, if anybody, it might still be up on YouTube. I haven't looked, but look up Garden of Eden, Blanca, Colorado, and see if it comes up. But this guy was nuts, and he'd do these videos, and he would like invite people to come out and live on his commune with him. And so of course it's on terms, so it's still in my name. So I'd get code enforcement letters, and I ignored him at first, and then eventually I had to do something about it. So when I contacted him about it and talked to him, he just went ballistic. and started threatening my family and all that stuff. And I just thought, okay, you know what? I've made some money on this deal. I'm gonna gonna let it. I'm just gonna let it go to taxes. I'm just not gonna pay the taxes on it and friggin' let it go. And I just forgot about it. And like, I don't know, a couple years later, um, I sold another property south of there to another guy, and it was one of those where he wanted to meet with me. So I met him at a coffee shop across the street, and he drove up to where I lived, and we did the paperwork and everything. And I was telling him the story about this dude, and he's like, "Oh man, we'll get him off that property for you." So he and his brothers were in a biker gang. And they were nice dudes, but I think the kind of the guys that they're nice dudes until you cross them. And I said, you know what? I got an idea. How would you like a free property? I said, give me, can you wait here at the coffee shop for 20, 30 minutes? I'll run home. I'll find the deed and print it up. And I went, printed the deed. We went across the street from the coffee shop where there was a bank, got it notarized. I go, here you go, man. Have at it. And he called me like a month later. He said, yeah, that dude ain't on the property anymore. I said, I don't want to know anything else.
Problem solved.
Is it just me, or is it getting harder and harder to count on a job for our financial security? Who would have ever believed that we would go from the lowest unemployment in 50 years to 40 million people unemployed? Whether you have a great job and want to create a second income, or you're recently unemployed, you need to check out land.mba, your one-stop shop for land investors. Investing in vacant land is a proven business model that can help you build a reliable and scalable second income. Imagine a business where you love what you do. There's no limit on how much money you can make. You can operate your business from anywhere in the world with an internet connection. And best of all, you can never be fired or downsized. If this sounds good to you, Land.MBA provides everything you need to get your business up and running and delivering income quickly. You get education, an end-to-end video course and optional coaching to help you get started faster and turn your energy into income. You get tools so you can automate and outsource the busy work and stay super organized. You get access to a thriving community of like-minded investors, which is a powerful way to share best practices and develop potential partnerships for growing your business. And finally, you get access to deal financing, so you never have to pass on a great investment opportunity due to limited funds. Our team has over a decade of real estate investing experience and has the knowledge and experience you need to help navigate any investing scenario. And with Land.MBA, we hold nothing back. Because there are no upsells, you get access to all of our combined knowledge right out of the gate. So don't wait to provide your family with financial freedom. Sign up today for Land.MBA's Soup to Nuts Land Investing video course. Just go to courses.land.mba and use coupon code FREEDOM to get 25% off. That's courses.land.mba and coupon code FREEDOM. And let us help you say goodbye to your JOB and hello to financial freedom.
All right, that's what I'm going to have to do. I have
So
to go find my Sons of Anarchy to sell this property to.
so you got a squatter then?
We'll figure something out. Yeah.
All
It's
right.
not a
Sounds
good
good,
plan
man.
when people start pulling shotguns on my prospective buyers.
No.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
So we covered the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, well,
of
yeah.
land flipping today. So
And I'm looking at three
now,
pictures and I'm trying to allocate those terms as well. And I'm just noticing that, somebody has a little something on top of his head on this call. So, so we got that going for me.
Okay. All right. You can be the non-ugly. All right. So with that, let's segue into the really cool, interesting stuff that Jeff is working on with a certain type of commercial real estate asset.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I always think that, the people who are, really the uber wealthy ones are the ones who realize that if you want to make the big bucks, you got to get the government contracts because, man, there's so much money to be had. It's hard to do, and that's not for everybody. So there's, huge filters to keep the riffraff out. But if you can figure out how to do it, man, and you can lock it in, and it's a beautiful thing. And so when I found out that, that was your background, Jeff, I'm like, we got to get Jeff on the podcast. This is going to be awesome. And so you have not only as a career, done this early on in your career, but you've also figured out how to do it as a real estate investor. So
Exactly.
start us from the beginning on like kind of where you started with sort of the government real estate model and how you turned it from a job into, an investment opportunity.
Sure, absolutely. So my first job out of college, working for a large group out of Chicago. I was based in Minneapolis, but we had a contract with the government where we were responsible for helping the government procure leases. FBI, Social Security Administration, TSA. So I mean, I helped after 9/11. I opened up and found space in all the little airports in the Dakotas, Montana, Wyoming, for the TSA. And so as part of that, I eventually, you eventually realize that the people that are leasing these buildings to the government are people just like us. They're invested in real estate, or it's maybe they have one or two, but there are people that actually chase these government leases, and they'll lease buildings to the government as a standalone basis, single tenant, or sometimes just in a a multi-tenant environment. But one thing that always caught my eye as we were progressing down the road in our business years later, after really getting a really good introduction to all of the government lease forms, and they are very different than private sector lease forms, is I kind of know how to read government leases, and I know what the different terminology is, and I know how they make their decisions, or justify the decision to go to one property versus another, and do it in such a way that is not offensive. In other words, they can't have someone from the public call up the paper and say, hey, the government was going to lease my building, but they're discriminating against me, and they went elsewhere. Well, there's ways that they just say, what, that building was non-conforming. And so the long story short is, I really kind of realized after a while that the best thing about government leases was the government rent checks always came. If you own an office building and you've got let's just call it a 100,000 square foot building where you've got a law firm that occupies half of it, on the surface, you think, that's great. I got a law firm, they'll be here forever. Well, it's a partnership. It could break up and that rent could be gone tomorrow. You could be completely underwater on your loan for the building, and you might have to go bankrupt yourself. But we got into the environment of really looking at post offices. Now, there's a lot of hype that's been around post offices lately in the last 5 years. Some of it, in fact, a lot of it has been negative. It's been, oh, we got to close post offices. There's, they're losing money, and they're the people there just, they don't work hard, et cetera, et cetera. The one nuance about the post office compared to a lot of government agencies is the post office is kind of quasi-government, but it's also constitutionally guaranteed to exist. So the post office is always going to be there, barring a constitutional amendment. In addition to that, the post offices are busier than they've ever been. So you've got everyone, as the retail paradigm has shifted from brick and mortar to ordering things online. Well, there's 26,000 plus post offices around the country, and Amazon and anyone else that has to ship packages to people that order them online, they've got to send them somewhere. And a lot of these small towns, they send them to the post office. And then, in terms of the people working there, they're pretty much overworked. They're having a hard time in a lot of cases filling routes because they've got a need to actually hire more people. And from what I've seen from owning post office buildings, I know there's always a stereotype, and it's easy to say, oh, government workers are lazy. Well, there's a lot of government workers out there that work really, really hard. And it's why, even though, yeah, there's some times you think, God, the post office is running slow the last year with COVID, the mail comes. And so it's an agency that we've looked at and said, it's always going to be there. There's a lot of them. And then when you've got over 26,000 post offices in all towns all across the country, well, guess what? The post office itself generally does not own any of their real estate. They'll own their bigger distribution hubs. They might own, in some of the larger downtowns, they might still own the actual facilities. I know in Minneapolis, they still own the one that's on the Mississippi River. It's prime real estate, but it's been the post office for 120 years. It's probably not going anywhere out of their portfolio. And in terms of the budget, well, the real estate budget makes up about 1% of the post office budget. So cutting real estate is not really something that's going to save the post office any money. Most of their expenses in pension and other aspects. And the thing about the post offices is, unlike a lot of assets, these buildings they tend to be smaller. If you go into a city that's 500 people, they've probably got a post office. And most of the people there rely on that post office, and that building's probably been there as a post office for decades. And it's probably owned by either someone in town, or it's owned by someone who's just got, they could have 5 or 10 of them just kind of around a region. And so we've really kind of made a concerted effort on our end to look at acquiring post offices as part of a strategy to diversify our risk, and make sure that we've got buildings that they're always going to have tenants in them. They're really hard to move because the government's got high standards for what a new post office has to have from a infrastructure and security standpoint. And in a lot of cases, there isn't an opportunity to move it in some of these towns. So we look for buildings that are single tenant, not multi-tenant, that have potentially the opportunity to increase the rents. A lot of the owners of these post offices are asleep at the wheel. They aren't sophisticated real estate people, so they don't necessarily negotiate when the post office renews the lease for maybe a little bit higher rental rate, or we would maybe amortize in some improvements into the rent, so we can get it back over maybe a 5-year period of time on a 10-year lease. Or in the case of one that we own, and I say we, I'm talking my business partner and I, and kind of some friends and family money. We purchased a post office here locally back in 2018. We knew that the property was not paying market rent. We identified that in this case, we had a property that, it sat on 1.5 acres. It was a 3,500 foot building. And there were no setbacks because it was zoned CBD, meaning central business district. So if we wanted to, if the post office said, what,
cannabinoid oil,
we can't deal with you guys. Yeah, we can't deal with you guys. We're out of here, right? We're gonna close it down. We're gonna figure it out. We're gonna be a post office somewhere, but it's not gonna be here because we don't like you guys. But we can put a 60,000 foot building on that property. So long story short is through some negotiation and really, what I want to say is we doubled the rent, but we didn't just double the rent arbitrarily. We had, like any negotiation, especially with the government, you've got to be able to make sure everything is defendable and justifiable. So we went out, we made sure that, hey, we did a survey of all the surrounding buildings in the area, and we determined that, the rent should be approximately 50, double what we were paying at that time. So
hey Jeff, I'm just going to ask you to hold that thought real quick. I'm going to pause the recording real quick. I want to resume. There we go. Okay, so hey, I want to tell our audience about our sponsor, Landspeed. Hey folks, people often talk about automating and outsourcing your land flipping business, but what does that really mean? Generic solutions leave it to you to figure out how to set up and maintain the automations. I've been running my land business on Landspeed for over 3 years because it's a total solution and allows me to focus on being a great land investor. Landspeed was built specifically for land investing by a land investor. And with many of the most successful people in the business using it for years, it's evolved into one of the most feature-rich solutions on the market. Some of the key benefits I get are being able to create and manage mail campaigns and neighbor letters. I'm able to automate tasks amongst my team, create contracts and deeds, and email, text, or mail them within a few clicks. I can automatically capture sales leads from any lead source, including Facebook Messenger. Then it automatically pushes those leads into my sales funnel so that I can manually follow up, but they also go into my automated drip campaign. And since Landspeed's a total cloud-based solution, I can run my business from anywhere in the world with a phone, laptop, or tablet. So if you want to turn your hobby into a professional, scalable business, just go to landspeedtech.com/Dave to receive a $150 discount today.
Effectively, we were able to through the process of just doing a survey of the buildings around and understanding what other tenants were paying, we were able to justify to the post office, hey, you guys should be paying effectively double of what you're paying. So
how did you do that? How'd you justify that?
well, we justified it because the post office is essentially it's a quasi retail area in terms of the type of building it is.
Yep.
It's a building that services the general public. And so the post office is not an office tenant, it's really a retail tenant. And we established a retail tenancy in the area that we own this post office. The tenants were paying about $30 per square foot. Our post office was paying us $15 a square foot. So when you've got a growing area and an established marketplace where you can produce lease comparables so that the post office can see, yeah, this is what the market bears, then you effectively put a gun to their head and say, look, if you go somewhere else, not only are you going to have to pay $30 a square foot, and I'm not necessarily picking that number out of thin air, that's what they're paying.
Right.
Not only are you going to have to pay that, but you're going to have to undergo all of the things that you have to do internally to pick up and relocate that post office, which includes a very laborious internal mechanism to actually do all the paperwork to get a post office moved from one section of a city to another. And so that's what we did in this particular case, basically doubled the value of the asset. And, post offices typically trade on a cap rate basis. And for those that don't know what a cap rate is, it's you effectively have the value of the net operating income. And we'll just choose $100,000 here as a round number. And you have that net income, and there's different ways to calculate it, but just think of it as the money that's in your pocket at the end of the year before taxes. And then you divide that by a capitalization rate. The lower the rate, the higher value of the property. So if you got $100,000 on a 10% cap rate, you basically have $1 million property. Post offices typically are advertised and trade somewhere between 7 and 8% on average. So it tends to be a very stable asset. So it's got a lower cap rate. Now, if you have a group like Starbucks, they might be at a 4 or 5% cap rate, which gives you a little bit of idea of what people pay and are willing to pay for safe harbor real estate. But you can oftentimes negotiate the price to where you're effectively paying somewhere around 8, 9, 10%, depending on the market and depending on the condition of the post office, what types of improvements need to be done to the building. But oftentimes these are 1,000-foot buildings, 750 square foot buildings. So you might only pay $50,000 to $100,000 for a post office, which is something that's within the realm of possibility for a lot of people out there.
That's amazing.
Wow, really.
And I went to a post office conference. These exist for postal office owners. And I was struck by what a wealth advisor who was from rural Iowa. He was from Cedar Rapids. He was like one of the typical small town Eddie Jones guys. And he said, I've got a lot of clients that are physicians, attorneys, high net worth individuals who are very highly educated. And he said, I'm astounded by some of the decisions they've made in equities over the years, sometimes with my advice, sometimes against it. But he said, I've really made a concerted effort to track what my clients would have done if they had followed my advice or have done what I've done, which is I've pretty much put most of my assets in post offices. And I've determined that if my clients had done nothing else but invest in post offices over the last 30 years, they would have beaten the S&P handily. And the reason that you've got that paradigm is if you take a loan on the property, you're generally going to have the cash flow to cover it and build up equity. You can use that money and that equity to buy more properties. Or if you have enough of them at some point, you're making cash flow, but you want a little more, well, you can just take out a loan just for the hell of it, like you would if you were to make an addition to your house, but you can just use it for whatever you feel like doing. So
Yeah, go buy a bunch of land and sell them on terms.
absolutely. Absolutely.
You know,
So, I mean, if you're
yeah,
tired of earning 1% in your savings account and you're not up for flipping land, or you want to diversify, which is, in my opinion, it's always good to have diversity in real estate. I've got land, I've got
absolutely.
office and industrial and medical office. So post
Mhm.
office is part of that for me. And to me, it's a big part, and it's a very important part of what I've got as I'm looking at
Yeah.
my net worth over the next, what I want to see happen over the next 5-10 years.
I love it, Jeff. Hey, Jeff, I want to just, for our audience who maybe is not in tune with commercial real estate and cap rate and net operating income and how that impacts the value of the property, I'd like to just parlay off the example that you gave. Let's just keep the math easy. Let's say, you paid, let's say you got $100,000 in operating income,
Yep.
and you got a 10 cap. So
Mhm.
you're at $1 million valuation. Now, let's say that was the cap and the NOI that you bought that most recent property for, where they were paying $15 a foot. Let's just say the $15 a foot was giving you the $100,000 a year in net operating income at a 10 cap. Let's just say that the cap rate didn't even change, although when markets improve, the cap rates do tend to decrease. But you doubled the NOI. So you
Correct.
went from 15 to 30, and we're just fictitiously assuming that went from 100,000 to 200,000 in NOI. Now all of a sudden you got a building worth $2 million, like overnight.
Correct. Instant equity.
That's some nice equity to borrow against and go do more real estate deals.
Exactly. It opens up a
So that,
whole suite of options. You can
yep.
do a 1030
Now,
exchange.
now let's just say you drop that. Now you're at 200,000 NOI, 200 divided by, and now let's say you drop the cap rate drops to 8%. So what's that divided by 0.08?
Yeah.
Now the building's worth 2.5 million, and you didn't do squat.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
that's
And one of the reasons
really
that we were
good
able
stuff.
to, one of the reasons we were actually able to get this building that I'm talking about is the post office didn't have renewal rights. And, people look at that, even savvy investors, which is something we couldn't figure out, and said, well, if they don't have a renewal right, that's really risky. They could move, they could do something else. And we looked at it and said, well, for crying out loud, these guys don't want to move. Are you kidding me? That's great leverage.
Right.
They don't have the
It's
right to
opportunity.
renew. So now not only have we gotten the building where the rent is doubled, but every 5 years, they've got the right to renew. But what we've done is we've said, well, you're not just going to renew at the rate that we've got here, which is what they had in their previous iterations of the leases. And we had a history going back of about 20 years of leases. And we basically saw they would go up $1 a foot, and then they go down a couple, and then there was just no real variation. But in this case, we said, no, every 5 years, this lease is going to increase by 15%. So that means 10 years from now, they're going to be paying more than 30% of what they're paying currently.
Wow.
And I would guess that at the time we do the final renewal, if we haven't sold the building, we're going to be negotiating additional renewal rights at what we maybe feel are the future value of the lease.
Yeah. And is that a triple net lease?
It is. And that's
Beautiful.
It's a little bit. It's not a true triple net lease the way that you might see it in a retail environment. And by triple net, that basically means there's 3 buckets. For those that don't understand triple net lease, that means you've got your rent bucket, you've got your real estate taxes bucket, and then you have your your operating expenses, your utilities, your janitorial,
Maintenance.
trash, maintenance, et cetera. And the bottom line is those are all expenses that are net to whoever they pay out. You'll hear gross lease and modified gross, but basically what it really means is in a triple net lease, the majority of the expenses are billed directly to the tenant, and the tenant is responsible for not only paying for things, but also maintaining the facility. And there are some things that we are required to maintain, but it's nominal over the cost of the rest of the property.
So
Right.
I have a few questions that have just been percolating in my mind as we've been talking about this. So you
I have a
touched
few
on one.
answers. Let's hope they match.
So the first thing is that it just seems like this is such a niche
Yeah.
of investing, and it does require a certain amount of specialized knowledge, whether it's just strategic specialized knowledge or specialized knowledge of working with government and government contracts. And so, and there's only so many of them. There's a set number of them, and they are all currently owned.
Yes.
So your opportunity to buy a post office is constrained by what is essentially a fixed market. And it strikes me that the people who currently own post offices should have that specialized knowledge, which means there's not a huge arbitrage between what they know and what you know. I mean, what we love in the land business is that, especially around pricing, it's all about arbitrage. We understand market pricing so much better than the people selling the property, so much better than the people buying the property. And we can use that arbitrage to our advantage. How do you find an opportunity with people owning post offices who know just as much as you do?
Well,
How do you source them?
So you source them. There are other real estate people that just simply specialize in buying and selling post offices, and you actually end up sourcing them the same way that you source land opportunities. So if you wanted to, you basically can cull the database of all the post offices, get the ownership information for them, and mail them. And you might not mail them an offer the way that we do in land, which is typical. You might maybe a blind offer with a set price. Or it might just be simply what I've got put together is just an information letter. Like, hey, when does it expire? What's the square footage? Do you have the right to renew? Do you have the right to terminate the lease? And the one thing that's interesting is there are a lot of owners of these, but not every owner is created equally. So they own them, and they might have had them for a generation. They might have inherited them, or they might just be kind of asleep at the wheel. They bought them. They saw that the cap rate when they bought it was 7.5%. They took out a loan, and they just sort of looked at that and said, well, this is kind of what the post office pays for rent. And over time, they've just continued to, every time the real estate agency that's responsible for dealing with the post office calls them up and talks about the lease, they don't necessarily know how to transact that lease. One thing that's become very apparent to me is many of the people that own these post offices and own them for years, they don't really know a whole lot about commercial real estate. They just know about the cash on cash return that's gotten from the post office. So I do have a little bit of a specialized advantage in that I think that we know how at our company to take what someone else may not be able to do and exploit the opportunity with the post office to increase the returns. Now you've got a fixed time to do it, because once the lease is done, it's a legacy decision for 5-10 years. So you've got to know what the window is when you buy the post office, and you've got to have a plan before you buy it and before you close or your earnest money goes hard of exactly what you're going to do. You got to have in your mind, you got to be able to justify, okay, this little community of 1,500 people in the last 10 years has grown by 600 people. It's continuing to grow. There's commerce going on. So that generally indicates that you're going to have an opportunity, most likely, to increase the rent. So you do have to have a little bit of savvy, but by and large, most people that buy these, they might just see it advertised, or they might just kind of get it word of mouth from a buddy that that owns a post office, and they think, well, hey, that'd be kind of fun to own, and they own it. They are low maintenance. You don't have to do a whole lot with them. So from a real
That's
estate
triple net.
standpoint, it's pretty passive. You're not getting a call at midnight from someone saying, hey man, my heat went out and my kid's crying and I don't know what to do. Those
Yeah,
are the
go fix
calls
it
I'm not
yourself, post
interested in.
office.
Yeah, exactly. So
Okay. All right. So the next question is, uh, I was in the government. I was a military guy, but I was also a military guy in my last duty station at the Pentagon. So I mean, it was in the Washington D.C. area, federal government kind of
yep.
mentality. A lot of bureaucrats, and a few things I've noticed in that situation. One is it's not their money, so they don't really care that much.
hmm
Two, they work on a different fiscal year.
Yep.
And I don't know, does the post office work on the same fiscal year as the federal government or no?
Yes.
Okay, so September to September kind of
hmm
thing. All right. And then the last thing is that uh, the way the budgeting works in the government is you go through the budgeting process, you get your budget. And if in the last year you haven't spent your whole budget, the assumption is you don't need as much. So at the last quarter of every fiscal year, there's a mad rush to spend lots and lots of money so you could justify getting the budget again next year. So you put all that together, and it's kind of great for us because they don't care if they spend a lot of money. So you keep talking about, I says like, it almost sounds like when you're negotiating with them that they're trying to save money. And I don't know whether, is that true, or is that just, that's the game we all play. Oh yeah, of course you're trying to save money. You're with the government
It's,
kind of thing.
I think in a lot of, I think there are people, I've had both experiences across, whether it's government or other agency or post office or other agencies, where, there are, for the most part, it's easy to be cynical, but I think for the most part, people try to do a good job. They
Mhm.
try to save money. They try to do what it is that their job requires. I've seen I've seen quite a bit of laziness in the private sector as well. I can assure you of that. But
Mhm.
there are people that, I mean, they still are, they can't be incompetent. The agency that they run in the post office it's important. So yeah, they have to hold a budget. They have to go through their processes. And let's face it, it's an attractive job for a lot of people. You work at the post office for a long period of time, you get a pension. And we'd all like a pension, I think, after we're done working. But
Yeah.
for most of us, we don't get those anymore. And I never had a salary, so I don't really know how to spell the word pension. I'm kind of trying to correct
Yeah.
myself. So you do get people that are tough to negotiate against, but it's also why you've got to justify everything. And there is a brokerage firm that does all the work nationally for the post office and negotiating their leases on behalf of the post office. And it's one reason why sometimes you get into one-sided shouting matches where we do a lot of listening and then explain, because there are a lot of post offices and those guys are a little bit overworked, and they know that every time they don't rubber stamp something and they have to go back in and they have to take what we've got, which is essentially a nice package and an argument that's put together as to why we should be getting more rent from the post office, it creates work for them. So that's when we are able to kind of get the broker, and I am a broker, by the way, but we get the broker out of the way to have the conversation with the principal. So it's a principal to principal conversation. And that is where we tend to make headway. And it doesn't matter whether it's government or private sector. That's where business gets done in a real estate transaction, is when you get all the fine details set, people stand their ground, they draw the line in the sand, and then you get the 2 or 3 parties together that really make decisions, and they make the final couple of decisions, and that's where the deals are won and lost.
Interesting. So now when you're buying and selling post offices, that's a third party to third party transaction. So that
Yeah.
can really happen anytime. But when you're negotiating the rents and the leases, that's you to the government conversation. And so because of the fiscal year and the budgeting process in the government, is there a very specific timing around when those kinds of conversations have to happen?
Not really, because because the leases just expire at odd times. The leases don't just all expire at September 30th of every year. They're variable based on when the lease is started. Someone might have negotiated free rent. There's a whole host of reasons why the lease may expire at a different time frame. And at a certain point, it's really just making sure that you have plenty of time on hand, not just 9-12 months ahead of the lease expiration, but really you want to start negotiating 2-3 years ahead of time, laying out your strategy, which seems like a long time, but it does go quick. But it takes a long time to negotiate any deal in real estate when bricks and mortar are involved. And you have to kind of slow play it a little bit and be patient. And eventually, that patience yields significant results if it's done properly. So, and the same thing when you're buying it.
Good stuff, Jeff. I could. This is so interesting to me. I could talk to you about this for hours. We'll have to figure out how to have a beer over this one of these days and go into some more details. But
come out to Colorado every year to ski.
Oh, dude, yeah. Look me up when you get out here. We'll have to do a mastermind or something.
I throw you into the fences and break your rib though, because he is a hockey player at heart.
Okay, I'll keep my distance for sure. That's good. Well,
I'm not Gordie Howe. My elbows aren't very sharp. Sorry.
We're coming up against our time stop here, so I just wanted to wind things down and say, Jeff, is there if people wanted to get a hold of you and learn more about this, what would be a good process for that?
Sure. Probably the best way to do it would be to they could shoot me an email. My email is Jeff, JEFF at area-cre.com. So that's area-cre.com. And, we help people purchase buildings of all types, post offices included, and be happy to talk to anyone that had an interest in acquiring postal assets or other real estate.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, we'll put that in the show notes and make sure that's available for people. And we're talking nationwide. Doesn't matter the geography. Doesn't have to be in Minnesota, right?
Doesn't have to be in Minnesota.
Excellent.
Anywhere in the country.
All right. Very good. Well, with that, I bid you both adieu. And thanks for being on the show today, Jeff. And
thank you very much again for having me.
Talk to you all soon. Awesome.
We hope you enjoyed this episode, had a bit of fun, and walked away with some actionable insights that you can apply to your business. Dave and I have got some great content and interviews planned, so don't forget to rate and review, and of course subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. If we mention any interesting links or tools, you'll find them in the show notes. To learn more about Land.MBA, visit our website at, wait for it, Land.MBA. See you next time on the Land.MBA podcast.